The Garden of Ink and Bones is a monthly podcast about witchcraft, powerful plants, and making magic. I'm Belle of Belladonna and Bones, and I'll be joined by occult artist Rue of Old Omen, and we're witches who like to get our hands dirty. To us, magic is practical, visceral, and bound in blood to the soil and bones of our spiritual allies. It's time to get your hands into the dirt, do the work, make magic, and feel the witchcraft in your bones. Welcome to the Garden of Ink and Bones. Hello everyone and welcome to a slightly delayed episode of The Garden of Ink and Bones. I'm Belle and with me tonight is Rue. How you doing, Rue?
I'm doing great. It's so good to be with you again. I do apologise to our listeners for the slight delay, but we are getting it out to you just in time for Samhain, or however you'd like to pronounce it. How have you been, Belle?
I've been good. Like I said, and a bunch of people who follow us on Twitter and stuff would know that I've been in Singapore for work for a little bit when we should have been recording, and that was pretty intensely crazy. It's a really different place. Got to catch up with Kat Borealis of Borealis Meditation. That was just super exciting. There is nothing better than meeting up with witchy friends in crazy countries. Like really, really nothing like it.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely awesome.
Yeah, she gave me the most amazing fast luck spray, which is very, very cool, and I have some really great ideas on how to use it. But she made it from a traditional recipe from the Museum of Hoodoo, which is just totally bonkers. I love sharing those things with other witches.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear about that a little bit more later date.
Yeah, but I'll let you all know once I've used it and see how it goes. So we'll see how that one works out. But yeah, this, as Bruce said, we're going to talk about Samhain and spirit contact and working with different types of spirits and what else we can do with that and just how we work with it. Think of this as a bit more casual an episode. We'll be back to our regular scheduled programming next new moon, so we'll be back to doing a recap on the last book, which was Michelle Jackson's Bone Shells and Curios, and a recap on Belladonna, and also talking about a new book and everything, and that will be at the new moon. But tonight is just a casual conversation about spirit work. So, Rue, I know you love spirits. What drew you to, what type of spirit work drew you in?
So, as everyone's probably aware by now, that I always have worked closely with my ancestral spirits. They're sort of my main go-to more than any other sort of deities or demigods or what have you. But my family have just always been absolutely, I don't know if our family's haunted or what, but there's just always been so many strange stories about multiple people in the family witnessing spirits all together in the same room, of especially my father's side, of him seeing, because we do have Aboriginal in our lineage, and him seeing Aboriginal spirits standing over his bed when he was younger, which I also had the same experience when I was younger myself. But just lots of weird little stories. Our whole family is quite superstitious, so it's just always been one of those things that everyone's spoken about rather matter-of-factly and casually, as though it's not weird at all, and I've just always been absolutely fascinated with it. It's probably what really got me into witchcraft. But how about you?
Spirit work was always one of those ones where I consciously acknowledged that there was ghosts, because I just always seen them, just not like, I see dead people, just more in there has been a constant lineage of different ghosts being around at different times in different houses that I've lived in and stuff like that. When my mum passed away 20-something years ago, I was living in a different part of the state, and I was in bed and I woke up and she was at the end of the bed and the phone rang, and that was when I was told she was passed away. And I it's such a vivid memory, and so I think those sort of ghosts and spirit contact has always been around for me. I've lived in I've lived in houses where the spirits were aggressive in certain ways, like and had minor poltergeist activity and voices and things. And then I've lived with semi-benign spirits like I do now. So they've always been around, but my work with the spirits of the dead and my ancestors has been limited. Like, I don't actually actively work with my ancestors because I have such a weird relationship with my family. But I've been trying to work on that. Like, I spoke about that last episode. I've really been trying to find a way to sort of step past the recent ancestors and get to the ones that I don't have issues with, so that maybe they can help me through my issues with the ones that I have. So, yeah, but it's kind of crazy like that, But then, of course, there's things like, our spirits of place and our familiar spirits and our plant spirits and things like that, which we talk about all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's even without the ancestral side of it, we're just, I find, continuously surrounded by spirits of so many other different mediums. So it is a very, very broad topic, and so not everyone who's listening to this episode tonight has to go out to work with ancestral spirits like yourself. There are other things that you can form a really, really strong relationship with.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've talked about before. And, for me, the plants kind of take the place of a lot of my ancestor spirits and things like that. So in terms of spirit work that isn't ancestor spirits, what's your main focus?
So outside of ancestral stuff, I do tend to work a lot with the house spirit that does reside in this house, and sort of the fetch spirit that I guess that I've developed and cultivated over the years. So I'm always leaving out little offerings. I have my hearth downstairs on top of the fireplace where I've got a spirit house that I've made out of a bobcat skull that's been carved. That's set up just for pretty much, it's always let known that it's primarily for the spirit of the house and for my fetch spirit, but it's also for anyone else that wants to reside there. So it's sort of a little glowing beacon that, hey, this is a space that you can go. Instead of, wandering around the house intrusively and trying to get attention, it's sort of just somewhere that they can go and offerings can be made directly to sort of focus on. So when I am doing work, I tend to always sort of do almost like an opening ceremony before I do any kind of magical work, where I invite all spirits in, whether they're benign or malicious, and give them an offering and sort of, say if there is any sort of issues or anything like that, or a thank you for helping me, and sort of feed everything that I do work with or might be working against me to try and sort of make everyone feel sort of included, if that makes sense. So that's sort of my main thing that I do work with. How about you? What do you do other than working with, your plant spirits?
Yeah, I tend to, like yourself, have a familiar fetch spirit that I do a bit of work with. For our listeners, what do you use your fetch spirit for?
So it's sort of almost like a spirit that you can, I guess, really focus your energy into. And what I use it for personally is that when I'm trying to put magic out there, it's almost like the other spiritual side of me that I can help focus that energy on and say, okay, this is a task that you can go and carry out for me, or just to give it that extra oomph, or to try and help a spell sort of be let out and worked with, if that makes sort of sense.
Mm-hmm. What process did you go through to set that spirit up? Like, was it something that just developed over time, or was it something that you put active workings into, like, a Jewish golem or something like that?
So I think it's just something that sort of naturally and organically happened over the years. And it tends to, I found, especially when I was younger, getting a lot of dreams where this thing was sort of just appearing and presenting itself and sort of letting itself know it was there. Sometimes I will work with, so going back to the ancestral stuff, I did do some work a few years ago now where I wanted to dig up who in my ancestral lineage used witchcraft and how did they use magic, just to try and get a grasp of anyone not in the immediate family. And I had this absolutely amazing dream where I was standing in the middle of this room, and it was one of those really vivid dreams, and I was just surrounded by all of these people, just heaps and heaps and heaps of people, and different ones were coming forward and showing how they used magic. And I remember there was a young girl that was showing that she formed almost golems out of clay. Funnily that you mentioned that, and spoke about how she sort of worked her energy and her magic into these clay spirits and using them to go out and do work for her, which after that I did play with that a bit and I found it had absolutely potent results, which I think I've spoken about on a past episode, but I also found that they were really, really hungry in that form of constantly feeding it either blood or milk, and it was just so much maintenance that I prefer to just work with it in a more organic way now, where when I have my altar offerings, I'll set up, say, a cup of tea for my grandmother, because she always loved her tea, and then I'd always set up normally milk, honey, and one other thing as a sort of an offering or something to feed that fetch. So I'm not just feeding it when I need it, but I'm always sort of helping keep it empowered for when I do want to work alongside it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I think I've done the same as you. I've slowly grown the spirit, but when I had the opportunity to give it a vessel, it became so much more potent. For mine has chosen to live inside a kite skull, and it had more of an in-body experience for me. But then once this kite skull, once I cleaned this up, it decided it wanted to live in there, and it takes up residence and sort of overlooks my altar and stuff. So yeah, it gets offerings when I do work, and it comes out and has parts in my work, in terms of looking through things, and sometimes in terms of scrying, I like to have it. Sorry, cat's meowing. I like to have it on the other side of the smoke, so that it's looking at what's behind what I'm seeing, if I'm scrying in smoke. So that's always a fun one, because I get that it's like having a different perspective.
And so with that, and speaking about how it is having that different perspective, is your fetch to you another part of you, or is it a separate entity that you're working with?
It's definitely a separate entity, and I think it always has been, but it used to be indwelling, and now it's definitely chosen to sort of sit separately, and I think that's partially goes back to changes in medications and things like that. I think the way spirits interact with your body can change depending on what medications you're on. So that's always interesting as well to look at.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I've worked with sort of more short-term fetches and things where I formed them out of wax, and they've been really powerful. But again, like you said, really, really hungry. They just seem to have this. They're very short term, so like a atomic bomb. They need lots and lots of care and attention to do their work, but they work really hard and really quickly. Whereas my ongoing familiar doesn't require that heavy level of attention, and can be set to just do things quietly. He always sits over a prosperity spell that I have going all the time. He always sits. He sits under one of my household protection spells, and I think there's that. He's more long term maintenance instead of really short-term maintenance.
Yeah, definitely. Something you've got to form a bit more of a relationship with, and rather than just those little ones where, like, say you set them up for a week and just send them out, do their work, they're done, and then cut them off. So when you do set up your smaller ones, say you're working with smaller fetches, like we were talking about, you've done wax and I've done clay, finishing, I found, was definitely the most interesting part when I sort of finally realised just how needy and hungry they are and realised, okay, I've got to cut this off. So how is it that you went about, and how do you go about ending that relationship with a small-term fetch?
It depends on the nature of the task I've had them doing. If they've been working on, and I tend to get a bit elemental with it, but if they've been working on a fiery task and I need to put out the fire, then I'll consign them to water. If I don't want to put out the fire but I need to end it, then I'll often melt them, because I still need the fire of the task that they had keep going. So, but I'll melt them down and then I'll consign them to the earth. Although sometimes I just keep that wax. It depends on the nature of the task and whether any other herbs were introduced into the wax and anything like that. So there's lots of considerations. If it's straight up wax and there's no herbs in it, then I'll probably keep it. I'll melt them down and keep the wax, but just I might salt it or something just to cleanse it out a little. But yeah, sometimes they get buried, sometimes they get water. I usually try to convince the spirit to leave the poppet, but at the same time, sometimes they don't really want to. So, and if they're not really hungry, or they decide that, without if I'm not actively asking to do hard work, they sort of seem to want to hang around, I'll let them hang around. But they don't get fed the way they get fed when they're being worked with heavily.
And what is some methods, or how do you feed your spirits when you work with them?
I tend to use blood and oil and herbs. So a lot of the time it'll be an infused oil that feeds them. The blood ones, like you said, they're freaking hungry. I think blood begets blood, and they just want more and more, which is not a bad thing if it's your own, and you can work with it. But I don't. I'm going to take a tangent. Give me a second. So recently, I've noticed on Instagram there's a bit of furor about animal sacrifice and things like that. And also there seems to be a bit of an implication that it's really trendy to sacrifice animals and stuff, which is gross, just to be clear. Unless you're like an African traditional religion, you probably don't need to sacrifice animals, so stop trying to be all dark and shit, that's not necessary, okay? Just need to get that out there, because, man, that's freaking me out right now. People killing crows. What kind of idiot kills a crow? Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Like, they're the best familiars. And they remember, so, like, they remember you when you feed them. They remember you when you treat them badly. Why would you do that to yourself? Like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Anyway, could all be Instagram beat up, but, I just wanted to say, no, witches, bad. Don't do that.
I can feel you shaking your finger at me.
I was shaking my finger, of course I was. No, so, yeah, in terms of blood, it's usually my own.
Yeah.
Well, it's always my own. Unless I'm doing it working for someone else, and then they can feed the damn thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's lots of other spirits bring in other spirits, and so you spoke about the fact that you've got your carved skull that you've sort of set up as a spirit halfway house. But what do you do when the ones you don't want to hang around start hanging around?
Yeah, so that's always a pretty interesting topic in this house because we tend to have it happen semi-regularly. Like yourself, seems like over the years I've lived in so many haunted houses, and the house that I grew up in had quite a very aggressive poltergeist. But I also recently had an experience as well. So I tend to go back to the area to work with spirits where I did grow up. It isn't too far from where I currently live, and because I've formed that relationship there, that I definitely feel like I get a lot of my energy from being in that area. And recently I'd gone back because I hadn't been there for a while, and there's an old cemetery near the home where I grew up it's no longer in use, and it's been there sort of since the first settlers, so it is quite old. Like, there is a few graves that have been restored that have mentioned that they came over on the first fleet and things like that. But so when I go into graveyards to work with spirits, I tend to sort of always ask permission before I enter. I always give an offering of a gold coin. And when I leave, I tend to never look back as I'm leaving. And I'm often a bit more on my toes of, say, throwing a pinch of salt over my left shoulder or just saying to anything that it's not welcome to come home with me. And this time, of course, I didn't. So I'd gotten home, and I noticed that my dog is absolutely phenomenal at alerting me when there's a spirit in the house that sort of shouldn't be there. You'll wake up in the middle of the night to, him growling at a corner or something like that, and you sort of go, okay, the barriers have sort of worn off and something's accidentally come in. But this particular time, he was standing at the front door, and he was just absolutely losing his shit, like there was someone out there. He was growling and barking and pacing. And so I opened the door just to let him see, hey, there's no one out there. And when I opened the door to let him back in, stupidly, without thinking and being vague, I just said, come in. I didn't say it through to. I didn't say it to my dog. I just uttered those words without really thinking about it too hard, because I did have wards up. I had all my barriers set up. So I'd pretty much just in its eyes invited something in. So then for the rest of the night, there was just, those little bumps and weird noises. And then going to bed, you could just tell there was something in the house. So getting rid of them, I feel like I've just turned into a fine art at this point with just how much I feel like I'm constantly having to goddamn deal with this. So something that I found growing up worked really, really well for setting up areas not to let something in was burning protective runes into pieces of wood and setting them up above entryways. The way I personally look at it is that any doorway, any mirror, any window is an opening. It's sort of a weak point. So I think I might have touched on this once before, but generally about once a month I go through the house, I clean the whole house physically. I'll sometimes smudge it with sage or sweetgrass or Palo Santo wood, whatever I'm sort of working with at the time, and then I'll go through and I've got a protective oil that I've made. So sometimes the oil changes. Generally because silver is protective, I burn down a little piece of silver into some water to try and collect some of that silver off. Then I add different, say, herbs or different bits of protective matters into an oil base. So at the moment I've got one that has red brick dust, because red bricks have a higher content of iron in them, and as you know, iron tends to ward things off. I've got thistles put into it. I've got cayenne pepper as, again, chili, burning, one of those things that tends to drive things away. And then I've got earth for grounding as well. So I've got my oil made up, and I tend to go through the whole house from front to back, then from bottom to up, and on the top of every single window, every single mirror, every doorway, every opening or any inbuilt cupboards, I place an equal armed cross, and I say a little bit of almost a banishing protective charm, whatever that is at the time, pretty much saying along the lines of nothing's allowed in that I don't invite in, and that everything's sealed and closed. And I find once a month, that gives me about a month, and that works really well. So this particular time though, of course, I went and opened the door and said, "Hey, come in. Just fucking come join us." So my poor partner, of course, has to deal with me getting up in the middle of the night, and bells. I find over the years, bells are the best thing for driving things away. I don't know what it is about them, but they are just absolutely phenomenal. So grab my bell, grab my smudge stick, march around the house. I never get fearful because I tend to know that fear feeds these things. Generally, if it's something malicious, fear just absolutely feeds them. That's what they want. But I find getting angry at these things tend to work a bit better. It sort of gives you that bit of confidence. And even my partner has found waking up in the middle of the night and finding something that's not welcome to be there, just telling it to get out, just demanding it and laying down the rules of, get out, you're not welcome, you need to leave right now. So bells, smudging, making demands, pointing out pretty much that it's not welcome. And if it doesn't listen, then I tend to say start setting up circles, bringing in ancestors that I work with or other spirits, and just really trying to focus on relaying down those boundaries and forcing it out.
Yeah, that's it. It's sometimes you just have to go, well, if you're not going to leave, I'm going to lay the smack down. I tend to resort to threats a lot.
Yeah.
Like, out.
Pretty much. But there was a few years ago I did mention before that I grew up in a house that was very heavily haunted. And it wasn't until a few years ago talking to my brother that I realised that it turns out growing up in that house we'd both had dreams about the same people, about two blonde girls, and we'd never somehow in all the years growing up together, never spoken about it until now, until we realised that we were both having dreams about these two blonde girls. And there's this little room under that house that there's something about it I've just never liked, and there's no flooring, it's all soil, so I've always just had this thing in the back of my head like, geez, that'd be an easy spot to sort of bury a body. But there's always been a very aggressive male spirit in the house that ever since I was a child would just absolutely torment me. Like you'd wake up and he'd be there. So I got pretty good at learning how to sort of set up boundaries in my room. So I'd always have salt along the doorway and have little charms and things so nothing was allowed in. And it'd work. But there was a night where I had a boyfriend at the time over, and it was like a full-blown possession. It was so freaky. He was mid-sentence suddenly. His eyes rolled back in the back of his head, and these noises were coming out that was almost like this weird demonic pig noise. So I grabbed my trusty bell, rang my bell, and that just snapped him out of it, and he was completely unaware of what had happened. Went back to talking mid-sentence, and then suddenly I think I'd said something that almost sounded like a bit of a challenge, and it had just started again. So again, rang my bell, but ironically after that night, that bell went missing, and when I moved out of that house, I tore the place apart looking for it, and to this day still have not been able to find my favourite bell, mind you.
Of course.
Still missing, but it worked. It's one of those ones that I find, if anything, it at least gives you another 5 minutes to sort of get things under control.
Yeah, I think I've said before, I tend to collect bells. Like, it's not a major collection, but I try to find, if I see weird ones, like weird ones in weird places and ones that catch my eye. So I have one that's from Vietnam, supposed to be from a Northern Hills village, but could have been take the tourist for all the money they're worth. But didn't feel like it, so went with it. And then the other ones, I have these unfinished sort of metal shop project bells that I love. I found them at a thrift shop, and they're great because they're just unfinished, and they've got all their casting edges on them and different things. So they have that. Yeah, they don't feel like they got set down to work. So they're mine to put to work as I need them.
Yeah, cool. That's funnily enough, yeah, something else I collect as well. In every country I visit, we always bring a bell back with us. So, no, they're one of those things, hey.
Yeah. And it's just, I think, well, A, which is a collector's, but, it's a terrible, terrible habit.
Yeah, you don't need just one thing of one object. You need at least 20 minimum.
Yeah, totally. What do you mean I need one still? No, I need multiple stills.
I don't know how many mortar and pestles I have now. It's ridiculous.
Oh, tell me about it. My husband found one the other day, and he's like, oh, this one's cute. And I went, okay, it can come home with us. I don't need another one. I don't need another little one, more to the point. Yeah.
So, talking about spirits in the home, you have a really, really fascinating spirit that I just absolutely love this story that is currently residing in your property.
I have Eric. So Eric used to own the house. He wasn't the house's original owner, but he did live here for 40 years, and he passed away here. He was a plumber, which meant that he was good at every trade imaginable in his own mind. And that means we have taps everywhere. So all around the house, there's 2 taps on each side of the building. It's just brilliant for the garden. But there's pipes everywhere. The electricals in the house are, crazy. The lights blow all the time. Like, we go through light globes like some people go through, avocados. It's just so many light globes that we go through in this house, which I think in part is because Eric was a terrible electrician, being that he was a plumber, and also because Eric still hangs around. I think that does have an effect on light globes. Plugs come unplugged a lot in our house, but Eric's main feature as a human being in life and as a spirit in death is that he was a hoarder. So in life the shed was full of building supplies that he'd scavenged from different work sites and things. There's a million different little containers of screws and bolts and nuts and nails and everything in the shed still that we use all the time. There was just all sorts of stuff under the house. Like, it took us an 8-meter skip to get rid of what was under the house. And we don't have like a 6 foot under the house. We have like 2 feet of clearance under the house, and we still manage to have that much stuff under there. There's every building material that's been used in the house, there's spare of it somewhere in the house. He was a terrible renovator. Nothing matches, nothing lines up. Just really crazy. But he collects things, and so every once in a while things go missing. I'm not the most organised or tidy person, but things usually stay where I put them. And then you'll come across them, and all the things that have gone missing are in one spot, weirdly in the house. Like, they'll be in one cupboard that you never use, or they'll be in one corner of underneath the couch. Now, that might be the cat, but he doesn't usually drag around headphones or anything like that. So, yeah, things go missing, and then they'll all show up at once. And I just blame that on Eric, because he just hoards things. It's just incredible. He's pretty good. He's pretty well-natured. He stomps around a bit. But in general, he's a pretty well-natured spirit, and I think he appreciates my love of books. So, he seems quite happy to hang out in amongst the bookshelves, and that's where a lot of things show up when they've gone missing. They've just sort of end up on a bookshelf somewhere.
So is there any sort of little ways that you have things to, say, appease Eric, or a place for him or anything like that?
Yeah, I thought about the whole spirit house for Eric, but then sort of keep falling back to that this is his house. It's ours as well, but it was his for longer. So I'd never really wanted to sort of trap him in that way, or feel like want to make him feel like he needs to sort of keep himself to certain areas. But I do find that some of the things we do is because we do pottery, we have lots of bowls around the house, and they accumulate things in them. And I think that sort of helps him be happy.
Yeah.
We'll put like to like and keep it all in a place, and we're very careful to keep the shed, all the little boxes of things that he left in the shed, in the same way that he left them, and we use them as well. So like the nails and the screws and the bolts and things like that, we use the things he left, and when we replace them into the containers that he left them in. So I think that gives him a sense of, I don't know, ownership over that part of the house. So
yeah, nice. That little bit of he's still welcome.
Yeah, and look, he's a pretty good guy. I mean, I think it's always nice to have your house spirits on your side. The reason we're talking about this is that Samhain's coming up for us in the Southern Hemisphere. We've said before that neither of us are terribly big Sabbath followers or anything, but this turn of the year, when we go from light to the darkness, and that thinning of the veil happens, it does catch both of our attentions in a much more visceral way than any of the other Sabbats do. Rue, what's this time of year look like for you in terms of practice?
So I don't do any magic work on Samhain. I tend to purely make it, at least in my home, as a day for all the spirits that I work with, all my ancestors, and pretty much just one big evening of putting on a feast almost. So every year I tend to make a spiced honeyed bread, which is something that I got from one of the spirits that I work with in a dream before. They mentioned this is something that they really like, so each year I go out of my way to try and make it for them. I tend to, through the year, brew mead as well, so I tend to always take a bit from, say, the best batch that I have brewed and place out a glass for any spirits that like alcohol. There's always the tea there for mostly the ancestral spirits that I work with, and just other things as well, like flowers. Something I picked up from a Cuban friend back when I lived in Texas is a lot of the so around that time in the Northern Hemisphere, you've got Halloween, and there's also, so in the South American tradition, you've got Dia de los Muertos, so Day of the Dead. So a lot of the Mexicans work with, say, marigolds. They always spoke about how the strong potency of the yellow of the marigold flower and the fragrance as well is something that they'd put out to draw in the spirits, and it was a day for celebrating the ancestors, because they felt that because they saw it was such a strong colour and a strong scent, it would help the spirits sort of see where they needed to go. So that's just something that I've sort of always done since I've moved back, is marigolds tend to still be blooming at this time of year since it is still quite warm here. So they're always something I tend to have on my table, as well as, those personal bits of offering for whoever I'm working with. But it just tends to be in this day is one big day for allowing everyone to come in and sort of as a thanks, and feeding them for the rest of the year to try and nourish them with that energy to sort of go do what they need to do.
Yeah, that's great. I feast as well. I tend to try and do a bit of what what is a traditional sort of meal for my family, which I consider a roast chicken. My mum was a terrible cook, but yeah, a roast chicken was the Sunday roast, and roast veggies, and usually something with the new season apples, like an apple pie or an apple pastry or something.
Yeah.
We usually head up to the apple country around Melbourne and pick up some apples and make some cider. Sometime around, we usually do it about twice a year, so we try to do it at the start of the season and at the end of the season. We have varying results with our cider. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. This year I tried to put less sugar in, and it's not so good. So I'm going to actually distill it and see what happens when I put it all through the still. But it's funny because like the first year's cider was really sweet and is now, and it's eaten all the sugar and everything, so it shouldn't be getting drier or anything, but it's just sort of matured into a really good cider. But last year's cider has just gotten really dry because I just didn't put enough sugar into it at all. So, but yeah, those sort of things I like to always make so I have a balm that I make and sell in the shop that's called Atavis, and it's an ancestor balm, and I've used 9 different herbs of the dead, and I pull them all together into the one balm, and I always make it at Samhain, and it pulls in that sort of between energy of the night, which I find works really well. It's really good for working with the dead in terms of just getting yourself into that mindset and sort of, while there's no potent herbs in it, I feel like it has an effect of sort of taking the shine off the live body so that you can slip more easily between the realms. And also it also has some of those protective it has some protective herbs that stops the unquiet dead from feeding on you. And then also there's the herbs for memory, to sort of help your ancestors remember you and why they should give you some help. So yeah, I always make that. That's always one thing that happens at Samhain. So there's always a bit of preparation in terms of doing that. So, but yeah,
beautiful.
Scrying is another thing I try to do at Samhain.
Yes.
Because that spirit contact is quite useful then. I try not to do it as scrying for anything. Like, I'm not trying to find a goal or anything with it. I just try to see what should come out. And maybe I'm not fond of the shadow work term, but what sort of shadow work I should be doing on myself and on the house and things like that throughout the next year.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I tend to include as well. It's not something I really class as magic work, but yeah, scrying at this time of year when we're in that transitional period, I find it's really quite potent, especially when you've got a whole day celebrating the dead, so allowing them to come through and say, hey, this is maybe what you need to sort of keep in mind.
Yep, exactly. So we're a quarter of the way through the year. We're at episode 4 of the podcast. It's probably time for us to check in on what we've been doing personally and outside of the podcast, because we try to keep our regular episodes to mainly around the work, but what else have you been doing?
So since we've last recorded, it's been absolutely madness in our house at the moment. We have just gotten a new puppy.
Yay!
So it's it's yay, but at the same time it's like having a toddler. And we've got an older dog as well, and you can just see on his face, it's like, why have you done this to me? Trying to just get them to get along and just constantly running around after it saying, don't eat that, don't put that in your mouth, where are you? And so all my plants at the moment, normally at this time of year, I tend to try and start to work at, okay, so we're going into winter, what needs to be sort of trimmed back, what's sort of going to sleep, collecting seeds. So I've also had to now go through our yard and drag every single poisonous plant, which is pretty much everything that's growing out there, and puppy-proof it all. But I've been trying to pretty much delicately go through all my seed pods. Like my Daturus at the moment are just absolutely bulbous with seeds, so I'm trying to harvest and collect them as much as I can without letting the dogs get into it, and drying all them and preserving them for next year's growth, and starting to cut back plants that I don't necessarily need, and sort of thanking those spirits that I've been working with and allowing them to sort of, have their time of rest over this winter period. That's mostly all I've really been doing since we last spoke.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The garden, because it's been such a warm spring, the garden's still sort of going gangbusters, but there really is, it's time for some maintenance, and things need to be cut back, and and there's some serious irrigation works that needs to happen in my garden over winter, so I have to sort of prepare for that and take a few things out of the garden and put them into pots so that the garden can sort of be pulled apart in some places to fix up that irrigation issue, and really sort of move those plants around. There's a lot of division. I didn't do too much division last winter, so I really need to get in there and divide a bunch of plants up. I didn't do my normal division, but I did do like my orris root and things like that. The calumnus root needs a new bowl because it's dying back right now going dormant. So that needs a new bowl to go in because it likes to live in the water. And just lots and lots of garden maintenance right now, really. I feel like I haven't had a lot of time to spend in the garden. I do my normal morning walk-arounds and things and little bits of maintenance, but no real serious time. Like the first actual serious time was on Wednesday when we had the public holiday, and I got in, ended up doing just all the really boring maintenance. Like I mowed and trimmed the hedges and things like that. So, and listeners would know that, we've been doing IVF, and we finally decided to finish that up, which has been a real relief in a way. It's been 12 months of trying, and it's a lot of money, which, I'm fortunate that we've not had to put ourselves into debt to do it, but it's expensive, it's very time consuming, it's very emotionally draining, and yes, we've looked at all the other options in terms of adoption and donors and donor regs and things like that, and we've just decided that they're not for us, that we're really happy being the people we are, and we have pretty awesome lives, and a child would have been nice, but it's not the end of the world if we don't have one. So that's been a pretty big emotional step to take, and then having people leave at work, and then having to go overseas for work, and come back to new people starting, and all that is just it's been a really big month, and we were talking just before we came on air that I think it's a lot of that Saturn cap thing, that this year hasn't been as brutal as last year was, in terms of emotions and things like that, but it's been the case that if you don't have all your ducks in the row, it's going to knock you on your ass. So
yeah, definitely, it's definitely the big lesson of this first quarter of the year. For sure.
We started yoga on this week, and it's the first time I've done actual yoga in a class, and I can tell you my body was not ready. I was not ready at all. I can play sport, but yoga, man, that is some weird hard work. Like, I did not expect it to be as much hard work as it is. So yeah, that's a big shift, but I'm really working hard for winter to be autumn and winter to be a real restorative process, for both body and mind, and just giving myself a chance to recharge.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's generally what I do with my winter as a witch, is spend this time almost as a getting everything ready for that boom of spring, because, you know, we both work so much in the garden. So it's almost that time of period of like, okay, what's in store for the next section, and getting ready and sort of really focusing what needs to come out.
Yeah. And I was thinking about the different things we plant and stuff like that. Like in the vegetable garden. So, you know, traditionally the next things that go into my garden are cauliflowers and broccoli and stuff like that. But this year it's going to be garlic and potatoes and sweet potatoes, and I think that's a real really symbolic for the way that life is for me right now. And, you know, really going from that sort of outward showy florets and things like that to the roots and the root vegetables and things that are sustaining and restorative, rather than more showy, you know. So that's really interesting as well.
So with you coming into winter, is there anything in particular that you tend to focus on in your practice over this period?
I actually find it's a very creative time of year for me, because it's the time when I have the chance to work on things with the herbs that I've harvested. It's very full on. This next month is crazy full on in terms of tincturing plants that are, you know, need to be tinctured before they're broken up or whatever, and also just drying, like so much drying. There'll be mushroom harvesting. There'll be, you know, I'm constantly drying things at this time of year, and so it becomes really creative because the inspiration of harvesting the plants and having them in my hands is really good too. And you know, I've been slowly working on, you know, it's probably taken me 12 months, but I've been slowly working on having a herbalist apothecary line of products that isn't just magical, you know, that we're talking about sort of medicinal herbs and healing tinctures and things like that. So that's sort of slowly coming together, but I really need to take some of this winter time to put together all the bits that go with it. So all the design and the labels and the, you know, and deciding whether I go a website or just Instagram selling, or those sort of things. It's all those decisions that happen at this time of year. Yeah, I tend to launch things at the beginning of the year. Like I have that's my compulsion, is to launch things at the beginning of the year. But I'm hoping that by launching this more from the dark of the year, that it will have a different type of energy. So
I'm really excited to see how that sort of comes to fruition then.
Yeah, and I think not having IVF to deal with, like, because anyone who hasn't gone through it probably can't quite imagine how much work it is, in terms of how many drugs you have to take and how that makes you feel, and then how many appointments you have to go to and things like that. So it's not having that as part of my life. It's almost like all of a sudden having so much free time because I don't have to do that anymore. So it's kind of really relieving.
Yeah.
In its own way. But so what's coming up? What does this time of year inspire for you, art-wise and things like that?
Yeah, so I find winter's my period where I tend to do a lot of my own personal art. I don't know, I find work slows down a little bit more, so I get a bit more of a chance to sort of sit back and reflect and work on what I'm working towards. So I've been in the midst of working towards an oracle deck for I don't know how long, but this is probably hopefully the winter where I'll actually get more free time to sort of be able to knuckle down and really get engrossed into bringing that oracle deck out and doing a bit more of the sort of business side of things. But it's mostly, generally winter is the period I work for myself less for other clients and finally sort of recharge my own internal battery. So I'm pretty excited about this winter, to be honest. And it's my time where I sort of go, okay, I'm the same as you. I tend to work well with the beginning of the year. There's something about it, the energy of the new year of, okay, this is the plan for this one and this is what's going to happen. So I generally do all my own personal stuff and wait till that end period to be like, right, okay, this is what's going to happen in this passing time. So not a huge amount, but yeah, finally getting towards that Oracle deck that I've just had on the back burner for who knows how long
then
now.
there's the other project that we've been talking about in terms of bringing together some of that herb knowledge and work that we've been doing in the podcast and perhaps presenting that in a different way for our listeners as well. So lots of things to do.
Yeah, I'm really quite excited about that one. We won't delve into it too much, but I'm very excited for the end of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, listeners, we do want to hear what you do over winter. What does Samhain and that time of year inspire for you? And if you're in the summer in the northern hemisphere, we'd like to know what you've got blooming, not just in your garden but in your life. So if you'd like, pop by the website and send us an email at questions@gardenofink.com, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram, which is Garden of Ink and Bones. So, look, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us, Rue. It's been a pleasure.
It's always so great to actually catch up, Belle.
Yeah, I know. And we do apologise for this episode being late, but we are recording our next episode next week, so that will be out for the new moon. And we're just really excited. So this episode will be out just after the full moon, and we hope to speak to you all soon. So thank you for joining us. Tell your friends, and we'll speak to you in 2 weeks.
Yep, until next time. See ya.
Ciao.